Light Yagami, Lelouch v. Britannia. These are two revolutionaries who saw something wrong with the state of the world and set out to fix it. Because both of these maniacal geniuses made their anime debuts around the same time, they have often been compared. They were willing to stick to their goal to the very end, at the cost of their soul, and as the path they chose leads them deeper into the abyss, they reassure themselves that their choice wasn't wrong. But as similar as the two sinister shadows appear at face value, let's peer beneath their masks to discover the truth. I'm Zero, this is Kato, and let's begin the cross-examination. But first, thanks to everyone who participated in the Kato anthology, which concluded earlier this week. Now we can go back to plugging the Patreon. That's right, we still want money. Until the YouTuber union gets us a decent wage, the prosperity of this channel will depend on the support of its viewers. So if advertisements annoy you, head on over to patreon.com/KatoYT and pledge as low as $1 to yell at us in our patron-exclusive Discord server. Oh yeah, and Kato's a two-man operation. Lelouch Lamperouge was a bored young cynic who harbored contempt in his heart for the state of the world. While his families and classmates knew him as a kind, brilliant, and upstanding man, he hid a darker side from them. If he looked around, it was easy to find those who chose to prey on the weak. Rotten people that the world would be better off without. One day he stumbled upon the power to destroy those burdening the world with their evil. Accompanied by an ancient and sinister mentor, he sought out to create a utopia full of kinder people. He must do it, for he's the only one who can. Light Yagami, helpful older brother and brilliant rebel who daydreams in class, one day stumbled upon an unexpected chance. He always meant to help the world at his own pace, but with this cursed power he would be able to achieve more than he ever dreamt possible. Those guiding the world to war and ruin will pay. Through violence and bloodshed, and his passion for outsmarting others, he will destroy the world and create it anew. It's the only way to create a peaceful world where innocent people like his little sister can be happy. The biggest problem with the arrangement is the annoying house guest who keeps mooching food off of him. Of course, there'd be no point in delineating the differences between the two if they were not deeply similar to begin with. The differences between the presentation of these characters in the first episode speak to what makes these two so distinct. Lelouch is presented as detached, cold, and even sadistic compared to the much more sympathetic, if a little unhinged, presentation of Light in this episode. Death Note endeavors to spend the first episode justifying Light, to an extent. As Hoodie explained in his last upload, the episode flashes back to end on the internal struggle Light has as he reconciles the fact that he had just killed two people. And the beginning of the episode sets up those two murders as extremely unlikely experiments. After all, a skeptical person would doubt the Notebook's abilities. This episode paints Light as someone making a reasonable, if impossible, choice. On the other hand, after a few establishing shots of Lelouch's childhood and a declaration that he'll destroy Britannia, Code Geass just shows us Lelouch as he is, and as he does, in a linear fashion. He ditches school to gamble, and it's the first time he doesn't look bored, until he's on the battlefield, where he finds glee in taking the lives of Britannian soldiers. It's pretty hilarious that Suzaku sees Lelouch still talking about obliterating Britannia after all these years, and says, "So, you're a terrorist now?" Death Note has to start in a more sympathetic perspective so that we can follow Light into the darkness. Code Geass chooses to justify Lelouch's wicked actions by showing us the depths of the evil within the opponent he seeks to destroy. Clovis feels his inheritance will be threatened by his secret, so he orders the destruction of an entire city. Britannian soldiers smile and laugh as they exterminate children.
And you have to wonder where
Britannia
could possibly be finding this seemingly inexhaustible supply of emotionless psychopaths. Possibly Liverpool?
But it never tries to paint what Lelouch specifically is doing as noble, because it's building up to the reveal that this is all for personal revenge. Revenge is a type of motive that doesn't play into Light's decision to become Kira, although it is one for Misa. For Light, though, he's never been a victim of the type of crime he seeks to eradicate. He just thinks it'll benefit everyone. And the cold logic of his decision makes it almost worse. Revenge is human. Light's decision to sacrifice his soul for the chance of a better future seems inhumanly noble. It's a choice no man could make, at least not for no reason. But is it nobility, or is it just cold, apathetic rationality driving him? And if it's the latter, how can he steel himself against the weight of his actions? Without a personal drive to be Kira, Light's motives seem much more dubious than Lelouch's. A lot of fans of Death Note have trouble reconciling the view that Light is actually a good boy. If his motives are pure, how does he justify killing good, law-abiding citizens? It ties back to this interaction between Ryuk and Light from the end of the pilot episode. Ryuk, hearing Light's plans, points out that it would leave him as the only bad person left. To which Light replies, "I'm an honor student who's considered one of Japan's best and brightest. In Light's mind, you're only as good as your actions. A good person does what they are supposed to do. It doesn't matter what they think or feel inside, just do the right thing." Probably the kind of worldview an ethical psychopath would have to adopt. And of course, Light thinks nothing of killing bad people. By getting them out of the way, he thinks he's doing everyone a favor. And finally, he sets himself up as the ultimate human authority on what's right and wrong. So of course, opposing him automatically makes someone a bad person, no matter what else they've done in life. So in his mind, he can kill as many criminals and law enforcement officers as he wants, and he can never be tainted. Comparatively, it's easy to view Lelouch as actually a good boy deep down, partly because he looks and acts like a teenager who feels a deep personal connection to the song Bad Guy by Billie Eilish. When he's alone with C2, he doesn't claim that posing as Zero is righteous. He simply says that it's the only way he can live to justify his actions. And he doesn't argue with C2 if she tries to suggest that he isn't the good guy. Lelouch believes everything will be worth it in the end because he's wiping out evil, but in the meantime, he is doing awful things. Lying to his friends and family, manipulating the hopes of the Japanese people, not to mention all the murder. Lelouch doesn't morally sanction any of this. In other words, Light is the virgin, "I'm not evil," and Lelouch is the Chad, "Yeah, I'm evil, so what?" Light and Lelouch would undoubtedly wag their fingers at each other if they were ever to cross paths, despite how similar their crimes against their fellow man were. A big difference between Light and Lelouch is that Light doesn't have friends. I'm not just dunking on Light here, the man goes out of his way to not have friends despite his popularity. He gets invited to hang out by male peers, and girls at school will drop everything for a date with him. It doesn't seem like a leap of logic to suggest that he doesn't think dealing with other people is worth the effort. Light also complained to L that intelligent conversation is hard to come by. This coming from the man who literally never talks about anything but himself in the entire show. That is, when he's not talking about Kira, who's also himself. For Lelouch, personal connection is extremely important. I wouldn't be surprised if it was the single most important thing to him. Every decision he makes is through the lens of how it'll impact his life with Nunnally, and later C2, Colin, and Suzaku. Although Lelouch seems callous to his subordinates at times and does manipulate them, he still probably thinks higher of Tamaki than Light does of Takeda. The one person Light seems to feel a real connection to is his father, and you could even argue that connection is severed by the influence of the Death Note. At one point, Light says he believes there's something about the Death Note that makes a person want to try it at least once. Which makes sense when we look at his reaction to the Death Note. He saw a notebook fall presumably from the roof, and he was compelled to go pick it up after class. Even after getting a good look at it and deciding it was obviously crap, he couldn't just leave it on the ground. He was, again, compelled to take it home. Even L, when he got his hands on one, made the argument that the Death Note absolutely had to be tested. The issue with the theory is the two people who, as far as we know, never chose to use the Death Note in their possession. Soichiro Yagami and Nier. But even then, it's possible that both of these characters have an innate sense of justice strong enough to break the Death Note's charming spell. It wouldn't be hard to argue that L actually didn't have a very strong sense of justice, but that he pretended to so he could get under Kira's skin. But although this charm is the only effect commented on by Death Note users, the Death Note could also have other effects. Both Light and Misa have pretty distinct personalities when they aren't in possession of a Death Note, and its memory. So much so that it seems like Light's personality was already completely changed by the second episode, to be something much darker, more sadistic, and more obsessive. When his memory is gone, so too is the calm and composed Light that will do anything to meet his goals. The Light we see here is passionate, fiery even, and morally reserved. Very different from the corrupted Light we see interact with L, though part of this is due to Light trying to hide his true self. We do see some of this flame when Light is alone, pursuing his true goal of subjugating the world. Misa without the Death Note is much less calculating and cold, and again, less obsessive. This version of Misa makes her own needs a priority, and gets upset when Light dismisses her even for something important. She seems less fearful, too. Although her obsession with Kira initially forced her to make some bold moves, she did so with much more carefulness than regular Misa shows. Similarly, we can't be sure whether Lelouch's increased ambition is his own or a result of the Geass whispering its potential into his ear. It's especially suspicious because while the Death Note seems to affect reality, Geass, at least originally, specifically affected the minds of its target. A power that dwells in minds and bends them to its will. It's easy to imagine that Lelouch's will is also being bent, to push him further down a path that would require the most use of Geass. And Lelouch's Geass in particular is tricky, because it makes you believe you want to do whatever it suggests. At times, Lelouch's use of Geass seems suspiciously liberal. Like, I get you're in a bad mood, but you realize that guy is gonna do push-ups until he dies, right? I can hardly imagine a worse way to go out, but at least Camus finally got his happy Sisyphus. Ultimately, these plot threads are decidedly subtext, because it would take away from either show if it was confirmed that Kira or Zero wasn't really making their own choices. Both characters are in the Anime Hall of Fame because they chose to abandon their lives and everything they had built and cared about in life. They forsook their very souls for their pursuits. Lelouch is prepared to damn himself to hell to make heaven on earth, and Light thought nothing of giving up his soul to a Shinigami if it came to that. Of course, Ryuk's response must have given him quite a bit of relief in that department. In fact, I think it had quite a long-lasting effect on him. Specifically, the use of the word fantasy. In this scene, Light entertains the possibility of something like a soul existing. But Light is a total materialist. The use of the word fantasy in the context of a spiritual discussion definitely stuck with him, as indicated by this scene. Light tells Ryuk that heaven and hell don't exist. With that in mind, the idea of going to Mu isn't scary in the slightest. The difference between Light and Lelouch is that while they both risk their souls, Light doesn't actually believe he has one. Whether or not it's the influence of the Death Note, by this point Light actually cares less about his family and his own values than Lelouch does throughout Code Geass. Light has already detached. He is coldly prepared to sacrifice both to get ahead, if it comes to that. At times he gleefully kills the good and righteous people with which he wants to populate the world. At others, he's apparently annoyed that killing his sister isn't an option. Lelouch could never kill those family members he doesn't deem worthy of death, and every time the path of blood leads deeper into the darkness, he sincerely laments. But regarding Light, he never seems to compromise on his morality, despite how evil some of his choices become. No matter what he does, he justifies it. He's too above it all. Kira's hidden darkness is more than demonic. It's godlike. Zero forces himself to stay grounded to ensure that the symbol remained a net positive force no matter what, while Kira abandoned all earthly emotion to steal his conviction beyond reproach. However, to view himself as above everything, Kira clings to his ego. And so the first and last emotional decision he allows himself to make is that treason against Kira is the highest order of crime. On the other hand, Zero puts himself on even footing with his opponents. If they accuse him of cowardice, he'll point it back at them. Privately, he won't claim moral superiority, though both he and Kira use that point as propaganda. To put it simply, while Lelouch relates himself to a cursed human, Light relates himself to a god of death, and they both fulfill their respective prophecies. To anyone wondering who wins in a contest of wits, it's not really fair. Light would have to peel back 2 layers of secret identities to kill Lelouch, and Lelouch only has to look him in the eyes. It's always been a mismatch in my opinion, even discounting the fact that Lelouch is smarter. It's at least 70-30 in Lelouch's favor. And I hope most of the comments are arguing about this now. Be sure to like, comment, sub, share, donate, pray, etc. We're trying to buddy up to the YouTube algorithm, so any and all engagement helps, probably. I assume it doesn't hurt. Anyone still listening deserves a treat, so I'll tell you about 2 future cross-examinations I plan to do. Right now, Zero and Heisenberg from Breaking Bad seem like an interesting comparison point. But the first idea I had in this format was actually about Nier and Yulian from Legend of the Galactic Heroes. I might do Nunnally instead, because I feel like Code Geass has more overlapping fans with Legend than Death Note does. Anyway, thanks for listening to my dumb rants. Subscribe for more.